My name is Nathan, I'm 29, and if you'd asked me 2 years ago what I thought Christmas meant, I probably would have given you a generic answer. Family, food, laughter, traditions. But after last year, the holiday carries a different weight for me. It was the night I sat at a long wooden dining table, across from the very people who raised me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and felt myself shrink under their laughter. Not the warm, good-natured kind either. The sharp, mocking laughter that cuts you open and leaves you pretending to smile while your insides twist into knots. I grew up in a family where success was measured in very traditional ways: a steady job, benefits, maybe a mortgage before you hit 30. My dad worked in finance his whole life and practically worshipped the 9-to-5 grind. My mom ran the house like an office, strict schedules, no wasted time. My older sister, Claire, became a lawyer, which instantly made her the golden child. My younger brother, Jason, went into accounting and was treated like he had single-handedly saved the family from ruin. And me? I took a different path. I didn't want to be boxed into the corporate machine, so I started a small online business. At first, it was nothing more than an idea, a little side project I worked on in my cramped apartment late into the night, while they all told me I was wasting my life. By the time Christmas rolled around last year, I'd been working tirelessly on my startup for nearly 3 years. It was finally starting to gain traction, but I wasn't rolling in money yet. I didn't brag about it much at family gatherings. I knew they wouldn't understand. Still, part of me hoped they might at least respect the effort, the grind, the sheer persistence it took to keep building something from nothing. But instead, when my uncle casually asked me how work was going and I explained I was still running my business, the room fell silent for just a moment. Then my sister scoffed. My dad smirked. And my mom, my own mother, let out a laugh that set everyone else off. "You'll never make real money doing that," she said, waving her wine glass like she was dismissing a child's daydream. "It's a hobby, not a career. You need to get serious before it's too late." Jason leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Maybe you should shadow me at my firm for a few weeks. Get a taste of what stability feels like." Even my cousins chimed in, cracking jokes about me selling internet lemonade stands or wasting my 20s on a pipe dream. They laughed so hard one of them actually snorted into their mashed potatoes. I sat there, heat rising in my face, trying to swallow my pride along with the dry turkey on my plate. I wanted to defend myself, to shout that they didn't understand what I was building, but the words stuck in my throat. What was the point? They'd already decided I was a failure. That night, lying in the old childhood bed my mom still kept made up like a shrine to simpler times, I stared at the ceiling and promised myself something. One day, they'd regret mocking me. Not because I'd rub their noses in my success, but because the way they treated me would mean they wouldn't be welcome to share in it when it came. Fast forward to yesterday. My company closed its first major deal, a contract worth $2.7 million. When I saw the number clear as day in my account, I sat frozen for a moment, the magnitude of it sinking in. All those nights of working until dawn, all those moments I thought about quitting but didn't, it had finally paid off. And almost as if on cue, my phone started buzzing. Calls, texts, emails. Family members who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly flooding my inbox with congratulations that didn't feel congratulatory at all. Jason's message came first. "Heard the news. Congrats, little bro. We should celebrate. Also, since I gave you advice along the way, I think it's only fair I get a small share. Just 10%, nothing crazy." Then Claire, "So proud of you, Nathan. Remember, I supported you when no one else did," a bold-faced lie. "Maybe you could help pay off my law school loans? Just a suggestion." And my mom, the same woman who had laughed at me last Christmas, sent a voice message saying, "Nathan, we're so happy for you." Of course, none of this would have been possible without the values we instilled in you. We'll talk soon about how you can give back to the family. Give back, as if they hadn't already taken enough from me with their mockery and disdain. The calls haven't stopped since. They keep stacking up, each one more entitled than the last. The words "we deserve" and "you owe us" appearing more times than I can count. I've been sitting with it all day, letting their audacity sink in. Part of me feels the old ache, that childlike craving for my parents' approval, the urge to make them proud. But another, stronger part of me, the part forged in those long nights of doubt and loneliness, remembers exactly how they treated me when they thought I'd never succeed. And so here I am, staring at my buzzing phone, knowing exactly how I'm about to respond. But before I tell you what I did, I need to explain just how deep this family dynamic runs, because this isn't just about money. It never was. The thing about family is, when they think they have the upper hand, they don't even try to hide their favoritism or cruelty. That Christmas wasn't the first time I'd been the punchline. It was just the loudest. But now that money was on the table, the true colors were bleeding through in every call and message. And believe me, they weren't pretty. I'll never forget the first call I actually answered, mostly out of morbid curiosity. It was my dad. He didn't start with congratulations. He didn't even ask how I was doing. His very first words were, "Nathan, you need to come by the house this weekend. We need to sit down and figure out how you're going to handle the money responsibly." The way he said it, like I was still some teenager blowing allowance money on video games, made my blood boil. "Dad, I've been handling my business just fine," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You think you have, but this is serious money," he replied, with that patronizing chuckle he always used when he thought I was out of my depth. "This isn't your little website experiment anymore. You're not capable of managing millions. But your mother and I, we know what to do with it. We'll take care of it, make sure it grows. It'll benefit the whole family." The whole family. Not me. Not the person who had stayed up nights, sacrificed weekends, lived off instant noodles just to get here. No, in his mind, my work, my success, belonged to everyone but me. Then came my mom. She didn't ask, she demanded. "Nathan, you're coming over Sunday. Don't argue." She even dangled her favorite line, the one she'd used my whole life whenever I resisted her control. "Family comes first." Always. But her version of family always seemed to mean everyone else comes before Nathan. And if my parents' entitlement wasn't enough, my siblings quickly followed suit. Jason, who had mocked me mercilessly at Christmas, suddenly reinvented himself as my biggest supporter. He called 3 times in one afternoon. The first time, he claimed he'd always believed in me. The second time, he suggested that since he was good with numbers, he should be the one managing my accounts. By the third call, he wasn't even subtle anymore. "Look, bro, I helped inspire you. You owe me a cut. Just send me something small. 50 grand. That's nothing to you now." Claire, meanwhile, took a different route, emotional manipulation. "Nathan, you know how hard law school was for me. I sacrificed everything. I deserve some recognition for that. And don't forget all the times I drove you places when you didn't have a car." As if a few rides in high school meant she was entitled to my livelihood. It wasn't just my immediate family either. Word had spread to my aunts, uncles, and even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. One cousin messaged me, "Hey man, congrats on the deal. Could you loan me $10,000? Just until I get back on my feet." Another one wrote, "We're family, so I know you'll take care of us. Maybe set up a fund for all of us. It's only fair." But the one that really broke me came from my mom again. She left a voice message, and I swear I played it 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She said, "Nathan, don't be selfish. You know we invested in you. Every meal we fed you, every dollar we spent raising you, that was an investment. Now it's time for you to give us our return. Your father and I worked too hard to not see the payoff." I sat there with the phone in my hand, shaking. An investment? That's what I was to them. Not a son, not a brother. An investment waiting to pay dividends. And of course, the comparisons started creeping back in. Jason bragged about how his boss had heard of my deal and said, "Guess success runs in the family." He actually told me, with a straight face, "You're only able to do this because we set the example. You should be grateful." Claire jumped on the same bandwagon, saying, "Your company only worked because you grew up in a house with discipline. Without us, you'd be nowhere." The worst part? They didn't just want money. They wanted control. My dad tried to set up a family meeting at their house, insisting I bring all the documents so he could review them. My mom hinted that I should buy a bigger house closer to them so I could host the holidays properly. Jason floated the idea of me investing in his accounting firm. Claire outright said I should pay off her student loans because if one of us is weighed down, we're all weighed down. It was like they thought my success was a family lottery win, and they were all holding winning tickets. The pressure was suffocating. Every call, every text, every voicemail chipped away at me, dragging me back into that role they had carved for me years ago. The afterthought, the one who wasn't good enough, the one who had to fight for scraps of their approval. Except now the scraps they wanted weren't emotional. They wanted millions. And yet, despite the anger boiling inside me, I stayed silent. I listened. I let them talk. Because while they thought they were pulling me back under their thumb, I was already making a plan. But before I get to that, you need to understand just how far their entitlement was about to go, because the real breaking point hadn't even come yet. It was only a matter of time before they crossed the one line you can never come back from. If the constant calls and demands were like water slowly dripping into a glass, what happened next was the flood that finally spilled everything over. I didn't see it coming, not at first. I thought their entitled comments and shameless requests were bad enough. But when people like my family smell money, they don't stop at asking. They take. It started small. One morning, about 2 weeks after I signed the deal, I noticed an email from my bank flagged as important. It said there had been multiple failed login attempts on my account. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was some bot or scammer. But then, later that day, I got a call directly from the bank's fraud department. Someone had been trying to use my personal details to gain access, not just to view my account, but to change the linked recovery information. When I asked who, the banker hesitated before saying, "It looks like the attempts were made using security questions, things only close family would likely know." My stomach dropped. Who else but my parents and siblings would know the name of my first pet, or the street I grew up on, or my high school mascot? I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but the pit in my gut told me the truth. My own family had tried to get into my account. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I decided to wait, to see if they'd slip. And sure enough, they did. A few nights later, I got a group text from my mom, of all people. It wasn't even subtle. She wrote, "We had a little trouble getting into your account today, but don't worry, we'll figure it out. It's just too risky for you to handle this money alone. We need to make sure it's protected." I sat there staring at the screen, heart pounding in my ears. They hadn't even tried to hide it. To them, breaking into my account wasn't theft. It was them protecting me. I typed back a single word, "What?" Almost instantly, my dad called. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "Nathan, listen. You're not mature enough to manage that kind of money. It'll destroy you. We've seen people lose everything because they didn't have guidance. We're your parents. We're supposed to step in. We already agreed that the best way forward is for you to give us access. Just for now. We'll take care of everything. You can focus on your little projects while we handle the serious stuff." The way he said, "We already agreed," sent a chill down my spine. They had actually sat together, my parents, my siblings, probably even extended family, and had a discussion about how to divvy up my success like vultures circling over a meal. That night, Jason sent me a smug text. "Once Dad and Mom have access, I'll help invest some of it. Don't worry, bro, I'll make sure it grows. You'll thank us later." And then Claire, sweet, high-achieving Claire, called me, voice dripping with false sympathy. "Nathan, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know you can't handle the stress of all this money. Let us take over. Don't embarrass yourself by clinging to it. We're family. Family shares. Family shares." I can't even describe what that moment felt like. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. They were trying to strip me of my independence, my identity, the very thing I had spent years building when no one believed in me. And they were doing it with the same smug certainty they'd always used when telling me I wasn't enough. That was the night I hit the emotional turning point. I didn't just feel angry. I felt cold. Something inside me hardened. Because in that moment, I realized that they didn't see me as a son, a brother, or even a person. They saw me as a bank, a resource to be mined until it was empty. I didn't tell them I knew what they had done. I didn't yell or scream. Instead, I let them think they were winning. I let them talk about meetings and plans, about allocating funds and setting limits, all while I quietly began pulling away. Because if they thought I was going to hand over everything I had worked for, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. But before I tell you what I started planning, you need to see just how far down they dragged me, how close I came to losing everything before I found the strength to turn it around. When you grow up being the family's punchline, you develop thick skin. You learn to absorb the little jabs, the dismissive laughter, the quiet sighs of disappointment. But nothing had ever cut as deep as realizing my own parents had actively tried to take what I had built. That betrayal didn't just sting, it hollowed me out. For weeks after discovering the attempted account breach, I carried a heaviness that clung to me like a shadow. I'd lie awake in my apartment, staring at the ceiling while my phone lit up again and again with their calls, their messages, their carefully worded reminders about responsibility and family duty. I stopped answering most of them, but even silence seemed to fuel their narrative. Suddenly, I was the selfish one, the ungrateful child, the unstable dreamer, hoarding money that wasn't really mine. The isolation was brutal. You have to understand, I didn't have much of a support system outside of them. For so long, I'd been the black sheep, too busy working odd hours on my business to build a wide circle of friends. My siblings had their colleagues, my parents had their country club dinners, and I had my laptop, my apartment, and the faint hope that one day it would all mean something. Now, with $2.7 million sitting in my account, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt lonelier than I ever had before. I stopped going out. I barely ate. I avoided social media because every time I logged in, I saw their faces smiling in group photos I hadn't been invited to, captions like, "Family is everything," mocking me from the screen. Meanwhile, texts piled up. Jason sent one that read, "Don't drag this out. Just let us handle the money before you ruin it." Claire tried to guilt trip me. "I can't believe you're shutting out the people who raised you. Mom's been crying all week." And my dad left a voicemail saying, "If you don't come home soon, we'll have to take steps to protect you from yourself." Protect me from myself. Those words played on a loop in my head, the same way they'd always justified controlling me. When I was a kid, it was about who I was allowed to hang out with. When I was a teenager, it was about what college I should attend. Now, as an adult, it was about the fortune I had worked for. And maybe the worst part? Some small, fragile part of me still wanted their approval. Some childlike corner of my heart whispered, "If you just give in, if you just let them take control, they'll finally love you." That voice nearly broke me. I found myself second-guessing everything. Was I really capable of managing this money? Was I selfish for not wanting to share? Was I ungrateful for ignoring their calls? There were nights I nearly picked up the phone, nearly caved, nearly handed them the keys to everything I had. That was rock bottom. Not just the loneliness, not just the weight of betrayal, but the realization that after everything they'd done, I still ached for their approval. But then something shifted. One night, I pulled out an old notebook I used to scribble business ideas in back when the company was nothing but a dream. The pages were filled with messy sketches, half-baked plans, lists of things I wanted for the future. On one page, in bold letters I had written during one particularly low night years ago, I saw the words, "Do this for you." I stared at those words until my eyes burned. For me, not for them. Not for their approval, not for their applause. For me. That was the night I decided I couldn't keep playing defense. If they were going to keep pushing, I had to start quietly pulling away. I began researching financial advisors, real ones, vetted, trustworthy, with no ties to my family. I opened separate accounts, moved portions of the money, set up safeguards. I started reading about trusts, about legal protections, about how people with actual wealth shielded themselves from greedy relatives. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was empowering, too. At the same time, I started creating distance. I stopped replying to every message. I let their calls go unanswered. I knew it made them furious, but I couldn't give them access to my mind the way they wanted. Slowly, my silence became my shield. And yet, even as I started laying the groundwork to protect myself, the storm on their side only grew. The guilt-tripping turned into threats. The veiled concern sharpened into ultimatums. They weren't just circling anymore. They were moving in for the kill. And when they finally made their boldest move yet, it pushed me past the point of no return. That was the moment I stopped being the quiet, hesitant son they could push around and started becoming something else entirely. When I look back at that dark stretch, what stands out isn't the loneliness or even the betrayal. It's the exact moment I stopped letting their voices define me. Rock bottom has a strange clarity to it. Once you've been stripped of illusions, you start to see everything sharper, cleaner, without the haze of hope that people will change. That was the beginning of my rise. The first thing I did was find a financial advisor, someone with no connection to my family, no reason to play sides. His name was Martin, mid-40s, sharp-eyed but calm, the kind of man who could explain complicated financial structures without making you feel stupid. When I told him about the situation with my family, he didn't laugh or brush it off. He leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said, "You're not the first client I've had with this problem. Money doesn't change who people are. It just unmasks them. Let's make sure they never touch a cent without your say-so." Over the following weeks, Martin became my quiet ally. He helped me set up protective layers, trusts, accounts in my company's name, legal frameworks that placed distance between me and the funds. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about creating a wall no entitled relative could climb, no matter how many family meetings they called. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, knowing that if my parents or siblings tried anything, they'd hit brick walls reinforced with iron. But my rise wasn't just financial, it was personal. I started working out, something I neglected for years while chained to my laptop. I joined a gym, not to prove anything to anyone, but to reclaim my own body after years of exhaustion. Slowly, I felt my strength return, my posture straighten, my mind clear. The fog of guilt they'd instilled in me for years began to lift. And as my confidence grew, so did my business. That first $2.7 million deal had opened doors I never imagined. Suddenly, people who once ignored my emails were now reaching out, eager to collaborate. I signed 2 more contracts in quick succession, smaller than the first, but still substantial, each one reinforcing that this wasn't a fluke. It was real, sustainable success. My little internet lemonade stand, as my cousins had once mocked, had become a company people respected. It felt almost surreal, balancing this private victory with the chaos of my family's escalating demands. Every time my phone buzzed with another manipulative message, I'd glance at it, shake my head, and return to a call with investors who actually valued what I had built. Their laughter from last Christmas echoed faintly in my memory, but it was drowned out by the sound of contracts being signed, deals closing, opportunities stacking up one after another. What I didn't expect, though, was how empowering silence could be. I stopped explaining myself to them. I stopped defending my choices. Whenever my dad left another voicemail saying, "You need to stop being stubborn. This is bigger than you," I didn't respond. When Jason texted, "If you don't let us in soon, we'll have to intervene," I ignored him. And when Claire left a long, emotional message about how I was tearing the family apart, I simply archived it. No more feeding the fire. No more giving them space to twist my words. Instead, I poured myself into my work, my health, and, slowly, into building connections outside of them. I reconnected with an old friend from college, someone who had always believed in me. I began attending networking events, even though social gatherings had always drained me. To my surprise, I found people who understood the grind, who respected the hustle, who didn't see me as a walking bank. It was like stepping out of a cage I hadn't realized I'd been living in my whole life. Every success, every ounce of progress felt like proof that I wasn't the failure my family had painted me to be. And the more I grew, the less power their voices had over me. But here's the thing about gaining strength. Once you have it, once you start standing taller, the people who used to keep you down don't just fade quietly into the background. They push harder. They lash out. They get desperate. And that's exactly what my family did. As my business climbed, as I became stronger, they crossed another line. One that made it clear this wasn't just petty entitlement anymore. It was war. The shift from defense to offense didn't happen overnight. It was more like a quiet hum beneath everything I was doing, an awareness that eventually they would force my hand. And sure enough, they did. Because once my family realized I wasn't going to cave, they decided to escalate in ways that almost felt surreal, as if they had forgotten I wasn't the same helpless kid they used to steamroll. The first crack came when I got a call from Martin, my advisor. "Nathan," he said carefully, "I don't want to alarm you, but your parents tried to contact one of the banks holding your business accounts. They claimed they were acting on your behalf." I remember sitting frozen, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "On my behalf? How?" "They said they had your permission. Even sent over a letter with a shaky-looking signature." Martin paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "Of course, we flagged it immediately. But you need to understand, this isn't them asking anymore. This is them trying to forge your hand." I felt something cold and steady lock into place inside me. A quiet fury. They had tried to use my own name against me. That night, I started digging. I hired a private lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Dana who specialized in asset protection and family disputes. She listened as I told her everything, from the mocking laughter last Christmas to the bank's fraud alerts, to the forged letter. By the time I finished, she shook her head slowly. This isn't just entitlement. This borders on attempted financial abuse. If they keep this up, they could face legal consequences. Legal consequences. I sat with those words, turning them over like a coin in my hand. For the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. I wasn't just reacting. I had tools, and I had allies who weren't tied to them. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly with Dana and Martin, layering my defenses. We drafted legal documents that made my independence crystal clear. We set up monitoring systems so I'd be alerted immediately if anyone so much as whispered my name to a bank. And, most importantly, I began documenting everything. Every voicemail, every manipulative text, every attempted breach. At first, it felt petty to keep such meticulous records. But Dana assured me, paper trails are power. If they ever try to claim you're unstable or unfit, this will prove otherwise. And then, in the middle of this preparation, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, something that shifted the balance entirely. Jason had gotten careless. He posted a photo on social media of himself and some friends at a bar, drinks raised, big smiles. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. But what caught my eye was the caption, "When your bro finally cashes out, everybody eats soon." Everybody eats soon. It wasn't just bragging, it was a confession. Proof that he had been telling people my money was theirs for the taking. I scrolled through the comments, my chest tightening. Friends of his wrote things like, "Can't wait for that payout," and "Man, your brother better hook you up big time." He had clearly been running his mouth, painting me as a guaranteed source of wealth. That was the piece I needed. It wasn't just entitlement anymore, it was exposure. If he'd been telling strangers that he expected a cut, how long before one of them came knocking? I saved every screenshot, every comment, every timestamp. Then I started paying closer attention. A week later, Claire slipped up too. She sent me a text meant for someone else. "Don't worry, once Nathan finally caves, I'll cover you. He owes us anyway." She tried to delete it immediately, followed by a flustered, "Oops, wrong chat, lol, ignore that." But I didn't ignore it. I saved it. Because by then, I had learned something crucial. The more rope I gave them, the more they'd wrap it around their own necks. And while all of this was happening, life on my end was only getting better. My company landed another deal, smaller, but with a big-name client that gave me credibility I couldn't have bought with a check. I was invited to speak on a panel about entrepreneurship. For the first time in my life, people who weren't related to me were looking at me with respect, not condescension. That contrast, the respect outside versus the greed at home, made my resolve ironclad. Because now I wasn't just a guy with money. I was a man with influence, with allies, with documented evidence, and with legal protection. My family thought they were circling prey, but in reality, they were digging themselves deeper into a trap I hadn't even needed to set. And as Christmas approached again, almost exactly 1 year after that night they had laughed me out of the room, I knew the stage was being set. They thought they were closing in, ready to finally take what they believed was theirs. But I was already in position, stronger than I'd ever been, waiting for the perfect moment to show them just how badly they had underestimated me. I knew their arrogance would be their undoing, and all I had to do was wait. Every manipulative text, every voicemail, every smug assumption that I was still the kid they could push around. It was all fuel. By the time December rolled back around, a full year since that humiliating Christmas dinner, I wasn't just ready to defend myself. I was ready to deliver the kind of response they would never forget. The invitation came, of course, from my mom. She called 2 weeks before Christmas, her voice sugar-coated with the false warmth only she could pull off. "Nathan, we're having everyone over again this year. It'll be nice to celebrate together, as a family. After all, this year is special, isn't it?" She let that last line hang in the air, thick with implication. I knew exactly what she meant. To her, my success wasn't just mine, it was their triumph, their prize. And Christmas dinner was going to be the stage where they expected me to hand it over. I accepted the invitation. Calmly, quietly, and in the days leading up to it, I finalized my preparation. Dana had helped me draft letters clarifying that no one in my family had any legal authority over me or my company. Martin had ensured every cent was secured beyond their reach. And I had my growing stack of evidence, screenshots, texts, voicemails, neatly organized in a folder. But I wasn't planning on yelling or accusing or even raising my voice. Revenge, I had realized didn't need to be loud. It needed to be undeniable. When the night came, I walked into my parents' house with a steady smile. The dining room was lit exactly as it had been the year before. Candles flickering, silverware gleaming, everyone gathered around the long wooden table. Only this time, instead of jokes about my internet lemonade stand, the room buzzed with forced congratulations and thinly veiled anticipation. Jason slapped me on the back as I walked in. There he is, the millionaire. Don't forget your favorite brother when the gifts start flying. He winked at his wife, who laughed a little too hard. Claire leaned in to kiss my cheek. So proud of you, Nathan. Really. You know, law school was such a burden on me, but I'm sure you'll help lighten that load. And my dad, glass of wine in hand, raised it toward me. To Nathan, he said, his voice booming. Finally proving he's part of this family's legacy. The applause around the table was polite, but hungry. Predatory. They weren't toasting me. They were toasting what they thought they were about to receive. Dinner went on as usual, though I barely touched my food. I let them circle me with their words, dropping hints, planting seeds. Maybe you'll buy a bigger house nearby. Maybe you'll invest in Jason's firm. Maybe you'll pay off Claire's loans. Maybe you'll fund a family trip to Europe. The word maybe became the most transparent mask for when. Finally, as dessert was being cleared, my mom placed her hand on mine. Nathan, she said sweetly, why don't you share with everyone what your plans are? You've been so quiet. The room hushed. Every pair of eyes turned to me. This was it. The moment they expected me to announce how I'd be distributing their imagined shares of my hard work. I took a breath, steady and calm. You're right, I said. I've been quiet for too long. And I think tonight is the perfect time to clear things up. I pulled a small folder from my bag and laid it gently on the table. This past year, I've had a lot of success. And with that success has come a lot of pressure. From people who think they deserve a piece of it. I let my gaze sweep the table, watching the smirks fade into tight smiles. So, I want to be clear tonight, once and for all. I opened the folder. On top were printed copies of texts and screenshots. Jason's bar photo, his bragging caption. Claire's mistaken text promising money to someone else. My parents' group message admitting they had tried to access my account. I slid them across the table, one by one. Like cards in a game, I was always destined to win. The silence was deafening. My mom's face went pale. Jason's jaw tightened. Claire opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again with nothing to say. These, I said quietly, are just a fraction of what I've documented. Every call, every voicemail, every attempt to breach my accounts. All neatly saved. All easily handed to the right people if I choose. I leaned back, letting the weight of my words settle. So let's be perfectly clear. None of you have any claim to my money. Not 1 cent. Not now. Not ever. This is mine, built without your support, without your belief, and in spite of your mockery. And if any of you attempt to interfere again, the next people you'll hear from won't be me. It'll be my lawyer. For a long moment, no one moved. The power shift was palpable, a seismic crack in the foundation of control they thought they held. Finally, Jason scoffed, trying to recover his bravado. You're bluffing. You wouldn't drag your own family through the mud. I met his eyes, steady as stone. Try me. And then I stood, leaving the folder in the center of the table, the evidence like a ticking time bomb they couldn't defuse. I walked out of that dining room with my head high, their stunned silence following me like an echo. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking under their laughter. They were shrinking under mine. But that was only the beginning. Because what happened after that night, the fallout, the desperation, the way they scrambled once they realized I was serious, that was where the real story began. The fallout wasn't immediate, but it was swift. That Christmas dinner marked the last time I would ever walk into my parents' house as the version of myself they thought they could control. When I left that folder on the table, I didn't just walk away from dessert. I walked away from years of their dominance, their smug superiority, their belief that I was nothing without them. And I think deep down, they knew it too. The first wave came the next morning. My phone lit up with messages from Jason, rapid fire and panicked. At first, he tried anger. You're really going to destroy the family over money? You're pathetic. Then he tried guilt. Bro, I was just joking in that post. You know I'd never really take from you. By the afternoon, desperation had seeped in. Okay, maybe I messed up, but don't go to a lawyer. Please. I could lose my job if this comes out. I didn't respond. Claire was subtler, but not by much. She called 3 times, leaving long voicemails about how she had only ever wanted the best for me, how her text had been misinterpreted, how I should remember the bond between siblings. At one point, she even choked up and said, "I don't know who filled your head with this paranoia, but we're family. Don't ruin everything over misunderstandings." But the one that broke the silence in me wasn't my siblings, it was my mom. She sent an email, formal and cold, practically dripping with entitlement. "Nathan, your behavior at Christmas was deeply disappointing. You embarrassed this family in front of everyone. The least you can do is make amends by contributing to the household that raised you. We expect a proper discussion soon, before this gets any more out of hand." That was the moment I realized they weren't going to stop. Not out of love, not out of guilt, not even out of fear. They would keep pushing, keep clawing, until I drew a line they couldn't cross. So I did. With Dana's help, I filed formal notices, restraining my family from contacting my financial institutions, documenting their attempts at forgery, and making it clear that any further harassment would lead to legal action. I didn't have to drag them into court. The threat alone was enough. Banks flagged their names. Advisors were notified. It was as if invisible doors slammed shut all around them. The calls dwindled after that. The voicemails turned bitter, then quiet. Jason stopped posting his smug captions. Claire withdrew into silence. And my parents, for all their bluster, seemed to retreat the most. They stopped inviting me to dinners, stopped sending the half-hearted "family comes first" messages. It was as though, once they realized they couldn't control me or my money, they no longer saw the point of pretending I belonged. And you know what? That was fine with me. Because while they scrambled, I thrived. My business kept growing, my circle expanded, and for the first time in my life, I felt free of their chains. I wasn't the failure at the dinner table anymore. I wasn't the afterthought. I was a man who had built something on his own, and who had finally learned the hardest truth of all. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect. A year later, when Christmas rolled around again, I didn't go back to that dining room. Instead, I spent it with friends, people who had stood by me without demanding a share of my success. We laughed, ate, and toasted to a year of growth. And as the night drew to a close, I thought back to that moment when my mom had laughed at me, saying I'd never make real money. I smiled to myself, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because the truth was simple. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had erased themselves from my future. And as I raised my glass, I said quietly, almost to myself, to doing this for me. For once, the words weren't a promise. They were a victory. The final line? They thought my success would make me theirs, but in the end, it freed me from them forever.